Hello, I'm Lorian Charles. I'm your presenter for today. We'll be talking about special services for students with disabilities, knowing and following the law. Special education services, as we know them today, have their basis in a law called the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA. IDEA is legislation that ensures that students with disabilities receive a free and appropriate public education. It has 6 key components. Those are the Individualized Education Plan, also known as the IEP. It has the Free and Appropriate Public Education, or FAPE, which means students should have access to everything that could benefit them and maximize their learning. It also has the least restrictive environment, which refers to where students are placed each time when their team meets, where they're placed. Appropriate evaluation, which has a lot to do with determining where students are placed, whether it's in their least restrictive environment. And also important is parent and teacher participation. As that IEP is developed, parents, teachers, and other board personnel, usually a case manager, special ed teacher, participate in this process so that the students' most appropriate behaviors are chosen. A part of this whole process, it's most important to have those procedural safeguards so that parents understand their rights if they disagree, they understand their role as participants, and they know, most importantly, that they have substantive and procedural due process rights. Other laws that protect students with disabilities include the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, Section 504, as well as the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990. These statutes protect individuals with disabilities from discrimination, and they provide them with equal access to educational opportunities. This means that students with disabilities will have access to the same facilities, the same learning opportunities, the same that they are not denied participation in activities because of their disabilities. And most educators see that in action every day. Those students who are in wheelchairs, but they have access to every part of the building, or they have students who are hearing impaired who can have interpreters or radio amplifiers so that they can listen to lectures, enjoy conversations at lunch, do everything that students without disabilities are able to do. Someone may be wondering why I'm even talking about these laws. And there are 2 key reasons why every educator should know about these special services and the laws surrounding them. One is that it's what's best for kids. No one can argue that having an individual plan and having input from multiple individuals helps students succeed. And that's especially important for those who have disabilities because they're often marginalized and left out. So it's important that we do what's best for kids. The second reason is that we live in a litigious society. And if we don't know the law and we don't follow the law, we are liable. It's expensive and it can cost our livelihoods as educators. So it's very important that we know and understand these laws that surround services to special students with disabilities. So court cases help educators to define how IDEA and other legislation for services to students with special needs or disabilities are enacted. And there are 4 landmark cases that I've included here. There are several that help define what schools should be doing to implement these laws. But 4 I've included here are very significant. The first is Rowley, which created the Rowley Standard that says one, procedures have to be followed in order for a student to receive their free and appropriate public education, and two, that the plan or the IEP plan developed should be reasonably calculated for educational benefit. Another is Timothy versus Rochester, New Hampshire School District. And the outcome of that one, we learned that students do not have to demonstrate benefit in order to receive that free and appropriate public education. So it's not enough to say a student won't benefit. If there's a possibility, they should receive those services. Irving Independent School District versus Tatro emphasizes that students who qualify for special services also qualify for related services. In this case, it was a student who needed additional health services provided. And the last case included is Beth V. versus Lake Bluff District Schools. And that case outlines the importance of placing students in the least restrictive environment so that they can maximize their learning outcomes. Of course, the history of court cases helps us to define how these laws are implemented in schools, but we also have new rulings that are coming down that further help us in determining what students should do, what educators should do to benefit students. One such case is RL versus Miami-Dade County Board of Education. And OL had been having trouble in middle school, and his parents advocated for him attending a smaller school for high school as he transitioned because they believed the size of the school was contributing to his problems. The IEP team and ultimately the board rejected that idea, and OL began the school year in the larger high school, but his problems began to get worse. He was throwing himself on the floor, screaming and yelling, and his parents decided to withdraw him from this large high school and educate him in a one-on-one setting. When they did that, his behaviors ceased, and over time the parents decided to re-enroll OL and request a setting similar to the one he had experienced in that one-on-one setting. When they brought this idea, the board rejected it. The courts ruled, the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals ruled in favor of OL's parents and said OL had been denied FAPE because the board had predetermined his placement. This is significant because even though it's important for the IEP team to prepare for a meeting, that team should always enter the meeting with an open mind, willing to consider suggestions brought by other members of the team, including parents. When they predetermine those things like they did in OL's case, the outcome can be detrimental for the student, and the school actually had to reimburse the parents for those private services. Another interesting current case is the Forest Grove School District versus TA from 2009. And TA, a former student of the Forest Grove School District, had begun attending private school before being found eligible for special services. He was later tested and qualified for special services, and the school was ordered to reimburse TA's parents for his private school tuition. The school sued seeking relief. The Supreme Court upheld the reimbursements for the parents because it determined that the school board had failed to provide a free and appropriate public education for TA. The rationale was if they had identified him properly, he would not have needed to withdraw and receive that private school education. This is significant because schools should be prepared to identify and provide services for students who qualify. Failure to do so may result in payment for private education. The last case I discovered caught my attention because it's nearby me in Huntsville City Schools. It's Filling W versus Huntsville City Schools Board of Education, and this happened in 2015. MW was found eligible for special services in second grade, but the team chose not to reevaluate her at her regularly scheduled time, and the parents agreed to this. However, during this time and shortly after, they began to make mention of hearing problems that MW had been having. By the end of her ninth grade year, MW was having problems not only with reading and math, and she qualified under specific learning disability, but MW was also having problems with communication, and so she had a reading, math, and communication goal. The parent stated at this time that MW was being fitted for a hearing aid. When the IEP was developed at the end of the ninth grade year, no mention was made in the IEP of addressing or evaluating for MW's hearing needs. The parent later withdrew the child and ended up filing suit against the school board for not evaluating MW for hearing impaired services. The 11th Circuit Court of Appeal ruled in favor of the parents, stating that the board had sufficient information as well as an obligation to evaluate for hearing impairment, and their failure to evaluate resulted in a denial of a free and appropriate public education. This is significant because it emphasizes the need for schools to evaluate suspected disabilities. So they had heard about her hearing problems on more than one occasion. They suspected that she would qualify under hearing impaired. Then they should have evaluated her. Schools must honor that responsibility to properly evaluate students who may qualify for special services. This discussion about legislation and laws that define this legislation lead to one very clear conclusion. Know the law. When you know the law, follow the law. But ultimately, our goal as educators should be to do what is best for kids, to meet the needs of students with disabilities and every student that walks through our doors, to give them what they need to be successful. Thank you so much for your time.